The scream never came, but the silence that followed felt like a warning no one could hear. On Christmas Eve 2002, 27-year-old Laci Peterson stepped out of her Modesto home with her dog, a bright red leash trailing behind her, and vanished into a world that had no intention of giving her back. Everything about her life seemed steady. She was 8 months pregnant, glowing, excited, and already calling her unborn son by name, Connor. She had a warm, easy laugh, and a way of making people feel seen, even on her busiest days. She and her husband, Scott, lived in a simple corner house in a quiet neighborhood, where the loudest sounds were usually bikes scraping over pavement or wind chimes knocking around on lazy afternoons. But that morning, the stillness outside felt heavier than usual, and by the time the sun went down, a mystery had begun that would twist into one of the most haunting cases in American true crime. Scott Peterson would later say he last saw Laci around 9:30 that morning, as he prepared to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. He described the moment casually, like it was any other day. He said she was watching a cooking show, planning dinner for that night. But something in that easy explanation carried a strange chill. While Scott drove away with his boat hitched behind his truck, neighbors noticed small things. The Petersons' dog wandering the street alone with its leash still attached. A gate unlatched. A house that looked undisturbed but didn't feel right. When Laci's stepfather, Ron Gransky, got the call that she was missing, he didn't waste a second. He felt panic settle in fast, like ice cracking under pressure. He knew Laci. She wasn't careless. She didn't take risks, and she wouldn't have gone anywhere without calling someone, especially not while 8 months pregnant. Detectives arrived within hours, expecting to calm a worried family and close the case quickly. Instead, they walked into a perfect storm of confusion and half-answers. Scott didn't seem frantic. He didn't seem broken. He didn't ask the usual questions. One detective later said he was calm, too calm, too. But calm alone doesn't prove guilt, and at that moment, investigators had only a pregnant woman missing and a husband who couldn't explain why he washed his clothes and cleaned his boat on the very day his wife vanished. Scott insisted it was all routine. Just habit, he said. But the timing made even seasoned detectives pause. As news spread through Modesto, hundreds of volunteers joined the search. They combed through fields, creeks, abandoned farms, and wooded areas. Flyers plastered every pole in town. Candlelight vigils began forming. The community held its breath, hoping for a miracle that never came. Meanwhile, detectives quietly began to pull at threads in Scott's story. They checked his timeline, the route he claimed to have taken, the fishing trip that seemed oddly spontaneous. And then came the break that tilted the entire case. A woman named Amber Frey stepped forward. Amber was soft-spoken, a massage therapist who seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. She explained that she had been dating Scott for weeks, believing he was single. But the detail that crushed the air out of the investigation room was this. Scott had told her he lost his wife. Not that she was missing, not that she was in danger. He told her she was gone, before Laci had ever disappeared. When detectives heard the recordings Amber had made at their request, one line echoed like a crack of thunder. "This will be my first Christmas without my wife." He said the words weeks before Christmas, weeks before Laci vanished. Investigators kept this revelation quiet while public searches continued. They needed to build a case, not just suspicion. They dug into Scott's finances, his emails, his calls. They watched him constantly. They reviewed satellite images of the marina. They interviewed neighbors over and over. Still, there was no body, no physical evidence, nothing that conclusively tied Scott to a crime. But every new detail pushed him deeper into a corner. Neighbors didn't remember seeing him load anything heavy that morning. His alibi relied on a fishing trip he planned last minute, and his behavior became stranger. At vigils, he stayed apart from the crowd. At press conferences, he looked detached. Even his own family started to sense a distance they could not explain. The tension in the case hit its peak on April 13, 2003. A couple walking near the San Francisco Bay shoreline found the decomposed body of a late-term fetus. The next day, only a mile away, another body surfaced, a torso missing limbs and a head. DNA confirmed the truth everyone had feared. It was Laci and baby Connor. The location of the bodies matched the area where Scott said he had been fishing. Investigators were done waiting. They moved fast. When they arrested Scott, he was driving with bleached hair, his brother's ID, thousands in cash, and camping gear. Police believed he was preparing to run. In the interrogation room, Scott stuck to his story. He said he had no reason to hurt Laci. He said someone else must have taken her. But prosecutors had already built their narrative. They believed Scott killed Laci at home, moved her body into his truck, drove to the marina, and dumped her in the water. They argued that the motive was simple. He wanted freedom. Amber Frey's recordings became the emotional core of the case. The jury listened to Scott's voice sounding warm, sometimes affectionate, sometimes desperate, even while the rest of the world searched for his pregnant wife. Amber testified that Scott told her, "I'll find a way to make everything right." The words stung in a way he likely never planned. The trial became a national obsession. Reporters filled the courtroom halls. Protesters crowded the sidewalks. Every detail became front-page news. Jurors saw pictures of the shoreline, diagrams of the marina, ultrasound images of baby Connor, and maps of tidal patterns that might explain how the bodies drifted. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial. They said the bay was too large to tie Scott to that exact spot. They said Laci had been seen alive by several witnesses after Scott left home. They said the case was driven by emotion, not proof. But the prosecution pressed one theme over and over. No one else had motive, access, or opportunity. The turning point came when prosecutors showed side-by-side timelines of Scott's phone calls to Amber and the hours when Laci was believed to have died. The contrast was jarring. Scott was telling Amber he wanted a future with her, while police believed his wife had already been murdered. The jury didn't just hear evidence, they felt it. After 5 months of testimony, the jury returned with a verdict that seemed to echo through the country. Guilty of first-degree murder for Laci. Guilty of second-degree murder for baby Connor. The courtroom erupted with sobbing from Laci's family. Scott sat still, staring at the floor. When the judge later handed down the death sentence, there was no visible reaction from him. Some called it numbness. Others called it coldness. Over the years, the case hasn't stopped stirring debate. Some insist the evidence was too thin for a death sentence. Others believe justice was served. Appeals continue. New theories surface. But nothing changes what happened to Laci or the life she never got to finish. The house she decorated for Christmas stayed dark that year. The crib she had set up for Connor stayed empty. Her family visits her grave every holiday, keeping her memory alive in ways the courtroom could never capture. Amber Frey later said she still hears Scott's voice sometimes, especially those words he spoke so casually. "This will be my first Christmas without my wife." In her mind, it's the moment the mask slipped. Some stories fade. This one never did. It still chills people because it reminds us that monsters don't always break down doors. Sometimes they kiss you goodbye in the morning and drive off like nothing is wrong. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.